like other countries, Nigeria open banking approach is private sector led. So it basically means we have a standard, but we don't have a regulation. In Europe, you have the PSD2. This is one of the key lessons we've taken from the UK. We understand that having a regulation is not just enough to create open banking, but having a well-defined standard is critical for that. But one of the things we're also making sure to do as far as open banking in Nigeria is concerned is to make sure that we don't over-engineer our standard. We love the UK standard, it's beautiful, but when taken to Nigeria, it can be quite over-engineered in terms of our approach to some of these things. But we're taking appropriate lessons.
In Singapore, I'd say that it was driven by the regulator, but it is not regulation. Still very much early days. I think what's also interesting is that the government in general has opened up a whole set of APIs and a whole set of data around your own personal info, around your CPF, which is the Central Provident Fund. It's a government-run savings scheme for Singaporeans. And so you're getting a lot of the overall ecosystem of APIs, not just in banking, and it's when you put them all together that you get a really interesting outcome.
On the one end of the spectrum, we have market-driven approaches, such as in China, for instance, where a lot of bank data sharing actually came out of industry initiatives, and also markets like Singapore and Hong Kong, which do have some level of regulatory input, but actually no mandate forcing anyone to open up. On the other end of the spectrum, we have markets like Australia, who have a very comprehensive data right, as they call it, a consumer data right. Markets like Japan, where you also have some level of regulatory framework in place, and markets like India, where it's actually quite innovative what they are working on regarding the account aggregator framework, as they call it. In Australia, there's actually a really ambitious consumer data right that was introduced by the government a few years ago, which is, as of right now, working up to its official launch of banking consumer data sharing as of the 1st of July, when the rollout will start.
When it comes to look at benchmark reference in the world of tackling the friction and the technical integration in the financial services sector, the Europe experience is key. Following the PSD2 journey in Europe, and especially the UK open banking initiatives, and we have taken pretty much a significant part of the practices, standards, and we have incorporated in our product. One of the key learnings in the UK experience, open banking experience, definitely it's related to the ecosystem. Brazil also has taken major steps in the last 12 months, driven by central bank. We are expecting a lot of things happen in the next 18 months in terms of setting the standards and a specific specification about how this is going to move forward.
Open banking in Brazil, it's an initiative of the Central Bank of Brazil. The main objectives of the Central Bank is to encourage innovation, promote competition, increase the efficiency of the Brazilian financial systems, and also the Brazilian payment system, as well as it's intended to promote financial inclusion. In Brazil, the open banking regulation is reaching a little bit further than the UK because it also embraces sharing of data on products like insurance, private pensions, credit proposal, and exchange operations.
Is the scene in about 2018 when the government essentially initiated a small consultation with regards to the idea of open banking when it was seeking input from the market itself. However, we really have not seen any, what I'll say, are crystal or concrete steps towards the idea of open banking. What we're doing today is we're seeking partners from around the globe that will come and join our initiative and be part of our overall framework so that we can actually show or demonstrate to the market the value of open banking with respect to the consumer. It's an interesting space. It's a great opportunity. In the Canadian space, it is going to be one of a wait and see from a regulatory perspective.
I'm going to talk about Norway and France. So in Norway, the regulator was quite instrumental in driving PSD2. As a result, the sector is quite unified. And they adopted the Berlin Group API to access bank accounts. In France, there actually were initiatives before the enforcement of PSD2. They were limited, and clearly it's the regulation that drove the slow adoption of PSD2. Now it's seen as an opportunity to drive innovation, foster innovation, gain insight into the customer base of the banks, and actually gain new customers because banks can be TPPs.
So the approach taken in Mexico is a mandatory approach, as it was considered that a legal mandate would help to accelerate the introduction and development of open banking in Mexico. However, the obligation for sharing data does not apply only to banks. It applies practically to all financial services providers. Also, there will be not a central entity, as it is the case in the UK with the OBE. Here it's going to be the financial authorities who will issue the rules that will be applicable to their own supervised sectors. And we're talking about 4 different authorities. It is Banking and Securities Commission, the Insurance Commission, the Savings for Retirement Commission, and the Central Bank of Mexico.
Ladies and gentlemen, open banking pioneers, good to see you all, and thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed watching that intro clip. We've had great fun compiling it, and we'll be sharing a longer, unedited version on LinkedIn. But for now, I'd like to say a big thank you and a shout out to everybody that took part, everybody that you have just seen. So first of all, Ned from Sing Life was first up, best dressed. Nice one, Ned, thank you. Lovely to see Marie from Oz, from TrueLayer. And Adijeg from Nigeria. I do hope I pronounced your name correctly, and great for you to be tuning in as well. Hello. And our friends from LATAM, we have Frederico, Tego, and the beautiful Maria. Or Marianne, I do apologize. And a big hey to Christian out in Canada. And hello to Fabian from OK, who is representing France and Norway. Do you know, I actually think we could probably have our own Eurovision Song Contest here. Anyway, so how are you all doing? I hope, like me, you're in the pink. We're just coming out of lockdown in the UK, and the hairdressers have yet to open. Now, that is a great segue to talk about the UK. And in the Fingleton report, the UK preparing to lift off for open banking report, it says that the UK created open banking. The UK created the blueprint for open banking. So it was made here. And as you've just seen, it's been adopted and adapted around the world. Now, around our campfire, we've gathered a diverse panel of global experts to explore some of the challenges that we have to overcome together, whether it be interoperability, regulatory standards, frameworks, or how it all meshes together into the payments ecosystem. But I would like us to really delve into, to shine a light on some of the user cases. And because we always need to, in this market, to be customer-centric, to be user case driven. So with me around our campfire, we've got John Detrixhe, FinTech journalist, ex-Bloomberg, and now the Future of Finance senior reporter at Quartz Media. So he's helping me co-host our session today. And it's going to be now a privilege, an absolute privilege for me to ask our global experts to introduce themselves. You know them all already. Amit, please can I ask you to say hello and to introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in. I'm Amit Mallick from Accenture. I look after open banking and APIs in Accenture. I have had the pleasure of doing this work for the last 5 years, so do carry a little bit of experience and baggage in this space. And as an organization, for those of you who are not aware of us, we are a large global consulting and system integrations firm, 500,000 people, and we do almost end-to-end stuff in open banking. I wouldn't bore you with the details of that, but we can talk separately if you need to hear more. Thank you.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing more. Thank you, Amit. Mounir, please, your brand needs no introduction. Please, let's hear from you.
Oh, thanks, Helen. My name is Mounir. I look after product strategy and operations for Google Payments in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I've been around since the good old days when it was still called Android Pay, and I helped rebrand it to Google Pay with my team and launch it in over 20 markets in Europe. We're now working on, obviously, the next generation of products, which means we have a very keen interest in open banking. Thanks for having us.
My absolute pleasure. Now, Josh from Revolut, I have your app, as do my nephews out in Colorado. And thanks to you, I can now transfer money super fast and super simple. So it's a very cool feature. I'm not sure I should be thanking you to make it that easy, but it really is a cool feature. Josh, we're all dying to hear what Revolut have to say.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for having me. Such incredible company I share with today. I have been with Revolut actually right from the start, almost 4.5 years ago, where we were just 10 folks without even, we didn't have money to buy on desks even, and to where we are now. So it's been an incredible journey for us to kind of, build almost like a financial hub for all kinds of financial products. In the UK, in Europe, all around the world, and we're quite new to open banking. We started off last year, but we have released a few things in the UK. We did something in Ireland yesterday, and we're quite excited to go to the rest of the world. At Revolut, our vision has always been to have as big a footprint as possible, and the next biggest vision is to make difficult financial products and very technically difficult ones easy for users to use and understand. So that's what we do at Revolut.
Thank you, Josh. And we were saying prior to us going live, just how humble, that humility, I think that must be part of the secret to Revolut's success. Carlos, all things LATAM, please say hello to everybody.
Hi to everyone. Thank you again, Open Banking Excellence, for having me. Helen, always great to see you. It's just again very humbling to be amongst a great panel. My name is Carlos Figueredo. I am the CEO of Open Vector, and I'll get to who we are and what we do. But more importantly, I was the head of data standards for the Open Banking implementation entity. So truly one of the pioneers of open banking at the very beginning, and having been where it all started. So very humbled and proud actually of the work that we did in the UK, and to watch how it's now become a global movement against all odds. It has been fantastic to watch how the different countries, different regions have taken it on and have learned. And what we now as Open Vector try to do, we are primarily an advisory firm that have taken the experience of the UK to other countries globally. We're probably one of the few companies that have actual national experience in implementing an open banking movement, like the likes of Mexico, and the work that we've done in Chile. So we're very proud of that. We've now, in the last year or so, have opened offices in Colombia, Brazil, and in Mexico. And our remit is, again, it's to really be there to evangelize, to help to understand the good and the bad of what open banking is, how it's meant to continue, but really to ensure that we've got the main pillars of regulation, strong emphasis on data standards, and of course, collaboration. But more importantly than anything is to really focus on customer centricity.
Fabulous. Thank you, Carlos. Hakan out in Zurich, hello. And without Mastercard support, we actually couldn't have this gathering around the campfire. So a big thank you to Mastercard, one of our sponsors. Hakan, please say hello to everybody and let them know a little bit about the great things Mastercard do.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. And hello from Zurich, from Switzerland. So I'm Hakan Eroglu. I'm the global open banking lead in Mastercard Advisors and as part of the data and services business. I'm looking after our open banking advisory and value-added services business as one part of the wider open banking solution that we are having. So Mastercard has a big kind of interest in open banking as becoming a ecosystem enabler for open banking globally. We are doing a lot of work in Europe right now, but we are growing also outside of Europe. From my perspective, I would say open banking is a great enabler for collaboration, for innovation in different regions. We will talk about regulation today. We will talk about customer experience. We'll talk about what infrastructure will play a role and what other applications and use cases. And from Mastercard perspective, we have different type of offerings and services around that. But I think today we'll really focus on our ideas and our thought leadership and our experience around the globe. I'm happy to be here today to contribute. Thank you.
Brilliant to have you on board, Hakan. Thank you very, very much. Wow, what a panel. So, John, over to you to delve straight in and talk about some of the user cases. Let's actually really get to shine a light on those user cases, please. John, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, a big thank you to my co-host, Helen, for having me here. And we have a fantastic panel. Pretty much everyone has a global footprint, but we would like to dive in and just talk about, what are some of the most exciting and unique use cases that have already been seen in some of the regions you work in? What are some examples of the use cases that you find are really compelling and interesting? And perhaps we could start with Josh at Revolut. What are some of the things that you're focused on here?
So at the moment, we've released both data aggregation and payments, and obviously payments is an extremely huge use case for us in terms of bringing our risk profile down and our costs. But some of the exciting things that we're working on actually with data is, I'd like to touch on three things. One is credit. Like credit is a massive product for all financial institutions, right? So one thing that Revolut wants to do is kind of use this customer information to kind of custom make credit or lending products for our users. We've seen users seeing banks with products, and if the user can't use that product, there's nothing else for them to do. But if there was a product which is custom made specifically for you, based on the way you spend, that is an incredible use case for us. Another one is just understanding the behavior and the patterns of users, and allowing us to make Revolut more personalized to them. A simple example is rewards. At this point in time, we ask the user to go to a reward section, search for some reward they'd like. But imagine if we look at your behavior and see where you're spending and just surface the rewards that mean the most to you using open banking. I think that's such a powerful and simple thing to do. So these are some of the very exciting use cases that we're working on at this point in time, apart from, fin crime and authorizations and stuff, which a lot of the other guys will talk about. But yeah.
Oh. Well, Joshua mentioned credit, and I wanted to ask Carlos, what are some of the use cases you're seeing perhaps in LATAM or other geographies that you think are especially compelling and interesting?
No, thank you very much, John. It's a great question. I think what I've seen personally that's been very exciting is personal finance. There's a huge interest in personal finance, and I think what I'm very proud of seeing and it's happening in LATAM is that they are truly grasping the true intent of open banking, of it not being really just selling products or selling, B2B. They're really realizing the opportunity of reaching out to the customer and providing customer experience. So personal finance has become a real big opportunity. And the most amazing thing is that we look at ourselves, and with very good reason, London being the center of the fintech community in the world, the biggest, strongest fintech community, but yet some of the greatest development of true customer-centric opportunities in open banking have come from regions that we never thought of. I was in Lagos about 2 years ago, and had already seen actually what the WhatsApp announcement was just for Brazil. I had seen a flavor of that already in Nigeria 2 years ago. So there's fantastic development happening on true customer-centric personal finance. Account aggregation is already something that's well spoken of, and I think we're beyond that. But it's really about being able to centralize everything related to personal finance and finding solutions to better customers' lives.
That's great. That's very, very helpful. And Amit, you have clients around the world, and I just wanted to know, at Accenture, who are what are some cases for you?
So, I mean, there are definitely a wide range of use cases which you could talk about, but two of my favorite, which make a huge sense to a traditional Accenture client, which is a typical large organization, one would be around credit. I know Josh talked about it, but I see huge demand of credit, especially in the specialty finance area. So things like auto finance. There is a huge demand from all of the large car dealers who have a huge, apart from the dealerships, they actually have a big auto finance business. You name, BMW Finance or Audi Finance. These guys are interested in using open banking to provide real-time, personalized credit to their customers. And it goes one step further. You can actually cross-sell and upsell. You can look at the customer's open banking data and choose the right car for them. And that's brilliant experience. So a customer comes into the shop and says, I want to buy this. And you could say, oh, you can't actually make the necessary monthly payments to do that. Or you can actually afford a much better car. And this is what we can offer to you. And that will be a game changer in terms of the right customer experience and being able to sell the right product to the right customer. The other thing which we are seeing, which has a huge demand, is in corporate. There is gone are the days when corporates connect to bank using host-to-host connections. That is a thing of the past. I'll tell a story without naming the actual bank. So there was this large universal bank, and this is one of my favorite stories, which went to Facebook and said, we want to do transaction banking with you. And the first thing Facebook asked is, we only deal with APIs. Do you have APIs for us to connect into and do banking? And the bank said no. So Facebook said, I know you are one of the largest banks, but sorry, we can't do business with you because we only work with partners who do APIs. So this is the real demand especially in the digital economy, where all of the FinTechs and the digital unicorns, etc., are demanding from banks that they produce the right set of APIs which can produce instant connectivity. So that definitely is a favorite use case. Some of the American banks have done fantastically well. Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America have done really well in that space and have a complete suite of corporate APIs.
It's really interesting. I think I heard Plaid's CEO saying one time, he was talking about the car dealership example, and he suggested, everybody's going to be a FinTech someday. Just kind of with the connections that you referenced there. Maybe that's something we can dive into a bit more. But Hakan, I wanted to ask you, what's your perspective from Mastercard? What's the view from Zurich?
Zurich. So first of all, I think Amit took away one example. This was Facebook or so. It's a corporate API. I know him quite well, so we worked together in my past career. So just to add on this, I think just to emphasize again, I think the corporate or the SME space is a segment where we see traction. First of all, of course, the corporate APIs that Amit was talking about, but also for SMEs. The examples that we heard by now are more focusing on the retail customer, so where we have credit scoring, having a seamless, instant application process for loans, where, for example, data that is retrieved from open banking are where you can use it to pre-fill the form. You can do credit scoring instantly and help the customer to apply quickly and get a quick response. What we also see is indeed to combine that with digital onboarding applications. So eKYC, video KYC applications integrated to that, so that a customer can apply for a loan, for example. A customer that is a future customer prospect could onboard very quickly using open banking data. I think that's one of the main areas that we see. And obviously, personal finance managers using artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, spending patterns, recommendation engines. So all of these applications that are on the market can be used to make the most out of open banking, right? So the applications are not really new, but the possibilities are new because you get a 360-degree view of the customer, you have access to the data through standardized APIs, and you can help them. So from Mastercard perspective, we are helping our clients here to come up with such solutions, applications, to make the most out of open banking. So PFMs for SMEs, business finance managers with liquidity cash forecasting applications, bookkeeping, connectivity to make the lives of SMEs much easier. I think there's a lot of traction that we see. And so, I mean, retail, SME, corporates, you see, use cases all over the place, but these are the main ones right now. And we need to be realistic as well, because it depends on the possibilities that open banking allows us to create use cases. We can think about use cases in the future, what is possible. I think that's good, but I think we need to be realistic on what's possible now in Europe or in other regulated markets with the access to data, and the level of granularity of data that we get in the APIs can only enable certain type of use cases. And these use cases that I just counted down are those that are the most obvious ones right now.
Got it. And before I go on to the next question, I also just wanted to mention that we do have Slido today. So for those of you who are watching, please do get in your questions, and I will do my best to get to some of those as well. And my next question, I wanted to start with Mounir at Google Pay. And I was just wondering, in a couple of words, pick a region that you're operating in. When it comes to implementing open banking, what was driving that? Was it the consumer who drove that? Was it regulation? Was it data usage? Was it something else? But in a couple of words, Mounir, what drove open banking in one key region you've looked at?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, John. I'd say that the primary impetus has been, in my opinion, has been regulation. And it's been because regulators, you can see that with PSD2, you can see that with some of the excellent thinking of the Bank of England, generally speaking. It's around spurring competition in the space of access to financial services, such that ultimately the ultimate winner is going to be the end consumer. So we see that as probably the main driver today. Having said that, it doesn't mean that financial institutions are not coming around to seeing this as a genuine opportunity. So we think that there's also a shift in the ecosystem where financial institutions are seeing this more and more as a genuine opportunity for them.
Got it. And Carlos, is it similar in LATAM, or are you seeing sort of a different dynamic in play as far as the driver?
I think it goes back to what I originally said. Thanks, John, for the question. It goes back to the initial issue about learning, lessons learned from the UK, right? So we've seen Mexico go probably for the most aggressive of all of the open banking, their open finance, as a matter of fact, the most aggressive of all of them anywhere, globally, it is Mexico. They've gone for a completely regulated, but a 20 subsector FinTech law, which is the most aggressive of any country. In the UK, for example, we've only looked at banking and the CMA9 as an initial start. In the UK, in Mexico, it's 2,265 entities that will be regulated from the beginning under the Mexican FinTech law, completely regulated. Brazil has taken that even a step further, but sidewards, where it may not be as so subsectored, but they've taken a very great stance into how that regulation will come to be. So mainly regulated, but they have also thrown in a flavor of market-driven with a close eye. So I think it's a very smart way. Brazil has done a bit of a mix of a 90-10, 80-20 kind of perspective. Very, very smart. I really like the approach. Chile's looking at a bit of a more, potentially more market-driven, and we'll wait to see just how that goes ahead, whether the Senate will proceed in allowing that to happen, and whether that is true. Colombia, in our experience and what we're doing there, is again more regulated. It's not market driven. It's completely regulated. Superintendency as pretty much will seem to be pretty much dictating what happens. So I think again, it's about lessons learned. They've looked at Mexico has done a great job of looking at Asia, looking at the UK and every other region, and have just taken a stance based on what they believe are best practices. So again, I still have a bit of a nudge towards being more regulated with a slight percentage of allowing the market to also breathe.
Interesting. I wonder if we're in violent agreement that regulation is the driver here. Hakan, have you seen something different, or would you agree with that about regulation?
Yeah, so I would say from my point of view, we see the development of regulators becoming innovators. Yeah, they intervene much more than before in this space of regulating to a direction of allowing more competition. But I think I do share the views of Carlos especially on Brazil. I think it's a good mix, and they have looked into multiple regions to learn from the best. Regulation is, of course, the driver at the end of the day, because that's reality, if you want or not. If you look into the market, regulation triggered the whole topic around open banking, where open banking was not called open banking. When you look into Germany, where open APIs were a normal thing for many, many years, but nobody talked about FinTechs or didn't talk about openness. But now, since we have the open banking term and the regulation in the UK with PSD2 in Europe, other regions have looked into it as well. I think from the regional perspective, I look into open banking globally, but I'm leading our innovation consulting piece for Middle East and Africa. So that's why I'm looking to the region much more focus. I think for the EMEA region, taking out the Gulf countries, there's some work going on in Bahrain, for example, which was a kind of a first wave of regulation that was implemented for banks to open up last year. So all the banks have to open up technical standards like APIs with a technical standard without any governance around it. The reality was then that, or let's say the purpose of that regulation was to attract FinTechs. It was not to push for competition. It was more really to attract FinTechs, to make the country to attractive place for investors. And the traction was not really there, because standards alone doesn't really help. There is much more required around it. And currently the government, the Central Bank of Bahrain, is working on the second revised version of the open banking regulation, which will be an open banking framework that includes aspects from UK, aspects from PSD2, and aspects from Brazil or from Hong Kong. So they are also now learned that there is much more required than just a standard or just an API, which is a good learning. So we will see some more work in the next couple of weeks. UAE, for example, the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, the regulator, is also playing with some kind of a regulation. I'm expecting a soft regulation, a more collaborative approach with the banks to come up with, whereas Bahrain is really prescriptive. Other countries like Saudi Arabia or Oman and others, I mean, we have seen some sandboxes in Oman or in Kuwait, but not that much happening right now. But Bahrain is a trendsetter in a way to where other countries are looking at. I think Carlos has mentioned Nigeria. I think Nigeria is absolutely the country in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, the country with open banking without regulation. I think there's a lot going on. And South Africa is let's say, a bank consortium that is working on some kind of standards and a collaborative approach in the market, which is a purely market-driven approach. But as you can see, a lot is happening, but we see similar patterns in the EMEA region as in other regions as well.
Got it. Well, it doesn't look like I've succeeded in stirring up any controversy yet, but I will bring up one. I want to hear the controversy.
Throw the first rock.
Please.
And it's no, nothing to do with what Hakan said. I completely agree. I've got some comments about Bahrain. That's because of some experience that we've had with them. But it's about the issue about regulation. We had the honor that Open Vector met with the governor of Seoul, South Korea, 2018, I believe. And we met with him, and he told us that they've been doing what we now call open banking for quite a long time. And he basically told me that they've realized that because they did not have any level of regulation, nothing's happening in the sense of, yes, there's APIs but it's the banks handling, monopolizing, using it for their own benefit and not really doing anything that's really customer centric. And again, you're going to hear me say this, and if I'm the counterweight of that, I'm happy to be. I'm very, very much customer centric here, and hearing South Korea say that they feel that they should have regulated from the beginning is really a good example of that. And again, we take Singapore as another example. there's lots of claims of Singapore doing open banking. In my humble opinion, it's more closed banking, because where you're doing open APIs within your own clients, well, that's not open banking. So we're not hearing a lot of products and services coming out of Singapore because, again, it's very much non-regulated and very market-driven. So we have to be careful with that. And again, Hakan, you said something very true. Banks are in favor of it, and they say they want to, but unfortunately, traditional banking is a very difficult thing to break. And we have to hope that regulation will help to nudge that. And the unfortunate thing, which I've been labeled as to be using scare tactics, but it's not. It's proving to be true. Is big tech. Big techs are forcing the hand, and they are coming out with the products and services with or without the banks. So this is again where I'm hoping that regulation will help to nudge the banks just over the line to allow for this customer centricity. My opinion.
You raise a good point, Carlos, about barriers. We've talked a lot about the positive aspects, but I wondered, Mounir, are there any other barriers that you think are notable? A lack of regulation can be one, but are there other barriers that you see to, the proliferation of open banking?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and be succinct in naming them, and the rest of the folks on the panel, I think, also feel strongly about these points and can chime in. Open banking on its own in a vacuum as a set of standards, and it's already been said, it is sort of not enough to drive adoption and deliver on the promise of access to financial services for people. One of the biggest problems that we have is around identity and authentication. The authentication models today of redirect and decoupled are pretty bad when it comes to the user experience. They are likely to involve a lot of drop-offs, and this is probably what you're seeing. There's the sort of infamous chart of a 90-day re-authentication for AISP users, and you can see that it just drops off a cliff. And PISP, if in the middle of a checkout you have to redirect, you can expect that you will see equally huge drop-offs, and hence the adoption is not likely to be huge when you compare it to the incumbent, which is card solutions. The other thing is these things already have solutions to them. First off, there are things like identity proxies that you can use, or payment credential proxies that you can use, so that you're not just freely sharing your bank account details. And I'm going to use the example of the amazing work that the NPCI did in India, where you just have a phone number and you use that as a proxy to pay anyone. In a similar way, authentication can be something that can be but even two-factor can be done through passive authentication means that various authenticators, hardware authenticators or otherwise, can provide. But there isn't a standard to allow for that to happen, which is a good segue to the second point, which is that today open banking is all sticks and no carrots for the banks. So there isn't really an incentive for the banks to invest and cooperate to build those authentication models to start with. And we're basically forcing them to open up their data. We're probably going to start cannibalizing the card payments and the revenue they get from that to use bank accounts as a form of payment. And there really isn't an incentive yet for the banks. And there very well could be. And I don't know if it has to be regulated or market driven, but you could have open APIs for the origination of instant loans, for access to lines of credit at the point of transaction, etc. There's no reason why things like this can't be in place to make open banking more attractive to the banks. And I promise to shut up after that last point. The third issue is an issue of technical complexity. And if I go back to your first question on this panel, which is around the best use cases, for me personally, because it appeals to my sort of appetite for scalability, the real heroes in open banking today are the people creating the building blocks to make it accessible to everyone. It's people like TrueLayer and Plaid who are democratizing the access to the APIs, despite the fact that you have a crazy proliferation of standards, at least outside the UK, and sandboxes that even today in many countries are barely accessible for a lot of the banks. And these building blocks are required. If you look at, I mentioned India before, if you look at UPI, it is a managed service. You plug in through your PSP and it gives you access to IMPS, it gives you access to UPI in general. And ideally, we have something like that that makes it easier for the SMBs or the rising FinTechs to be a part of this rather than having to integrate with 100 API endpoints across banks.
Well, I'd love to hear, Joshua and Amit's view there. I mean, I wonder, maybe I'll start with Joshua, just, Revolut having started in London and now, and also with operations in Lithuania and elsewhere, what barriers do you see, for open banking catching on more widely?
I mean, I completely agree with what Mounir was saying, that we need to be better at thinking of the end consumer. And we've been making this point, and it seems so obvious, but sometimes we forget that all of open banking is for the end consumer. And if the end consumer is, first of all, there's no value for them to use it. If the flow is too difficult for them, the UX is not good, they're not going to use it. And if the end consumer does not use it, open banking is a failure. I mean, we have to call that out. And just before coming on this call, I was talking to some of the guys at Trulia, and although UK has done quite a good experience when it comes to the app-to-app authentication, as it were, a lot of the European countries still, I mean, we're looking at Germany and Lithuania, for example. There's literally 3-4 screens that the user has to go through before they can even connect an account. So this almost makes open banking redundant in those countries. And if we're just going to say that, oh, open banking is ready, it's not ready until the user can actually use it and find value in it. So I think UX end to end is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we should overcome.
Got it. Well, Amit, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely right. User experience and journeys are key. One of the reasons why I think payment APIs have not really caught on is all of the challenges which Mounir talked about. The experience which you get with open banking payments is substandard than what you get in the market. Google Pay, Apple Pay, contactless is far more advanced, sophisticated, superior, and truly customer-centric in every sense. Why would I use open banking payment APIs? So clearly, there are gaps and holes to be plugged on that space. Second thing I think is there is still too much of fragmentation even within countries. Even we talk about PSD2, but PSD2 is actually Poland Group STET. It's the Polish API standard. There's 6 or 7 different standards proliferating around, creating too much of confusion around the market and making it really difficult for the fintech to actually do stuff with it, because it's expensive to do 7 integrations as against 1 where you have a consistent standard. So fragmentation. Last and the most important thing, and is for me, is customer education. I don't think the big banks are just doing enough to educate their customers about what is open banking and what are the benefits for them. Why should they be involved in it? I remember back in 2017, I actually had to call up my bank and say, hey, by law, I'm supposed to actually get a letter or an email from you telling me that this is open banking and this is what my rights are within the space, and why haven't you done so? And then they send me a letter within 2 days, and we are talking about a big high street bank. So this is the reality of financial services. They have. I hear that the top 9 UK banks have spent 1.5 billion in building tech to support open banking, probably to modernize their legacy infrastructure, but they haven't. I don't think they've even spent 1/100th of that in customer education.
Got it. Well, that goes somewhat into a question from the audience, and we've actually covered some of this, but I think it could be helpful, Amit. What, in your opinion, are the 3 best services and products to focus on when talking about open banking? So let's say you're talking to one of your clients. What are 3 services or products you would use to highlight? Earlier we talked about credit being one. We talked about personal finance. Perhaps we could mention, maybe it's in the personal finance bucket, but if we talk about brokerage, perhaps Drive Wealth, something like that. But what are 3, services to focus on here, in your opinion, Amit?
I would still, repeat, credit is my favorite use case. I think there is huge opportunity to change customer experience, customer journey, make it really easy. The two other use cases I would want to talk about are, one is definitely digital identity. Open banking to succeed needs, digital identity and some sort of, interchangeable capability within that space. I mean, if I take an example of, a large global bank whom I work with, and I have accounts in multiple countries, the open banking journey, even within a single bank, is fragmented because there is no common standard around digital identity. It just doesn't exist. If we have login with Facebook and login with Google, why can't we have login with a Barclays or a NatWest or HSBC or a Revolut? This is entirely possible. And why is that digital identity not supported or accessed across the entire ecosystem? So definitely, that is another space I would want to focus on. And I was about to say a third thing, which I have suddenly lost track of. I'll have to come back on that, but those two would be on top of my list, apart from all of the other things which we talked about.
Used car sales, not that one.
Yeah, that was credit. It's car sales, but cross sell and upsell.
All right. Well, I just also wanted to ask, Mounir, we talked about, glass half empty, was, the barriers, but what do you think are the big opportunities for you to kind of put you on the hot seat there? What perhaps, where could you see it? What kinds of aspects could you see open banking really opening up?
So I do think that, and I agree with you, John, that we also want to look at the glass half full here. And we have to acknowledge that this is a very uncomfortable change for a lot of players in the ecosystem. And to be honest, if you kind of look at it philosophically, it's part of a broader movement towards open data. And so I think that's going to lead to a proliferation of use cases outside of financial services strictly eventually, and create all sorts of process efficiencies. If I were to focus specifically on financial services, where we're really excited is for the fact that open banking opens up the ability for folks like Google and other tech companies who basically have a lot of know-how with building great user experiences and helping users derive insight. And so having access to people's financial information would allow us to give them very, very useful insight that can improve the way they manage their finances. It would allow us to, there was a point that was mentioned earlier, it would allow us to unlock all sorts of offers and rewards for those users that are meaningful for them as opposed to spammy. And you can think eventually if the as I mentioned, authentication models and dispute management platforms follow suit to actually be competitive versus the current card networks, you can think of a situation where payments are free, instant, and secure for all users. And I mean, we mentioned users, but everybody would probably agree no payment system would be successful without also providing value to merchants, because you need merchants for the adoption. And I think PISP could have a lot to offer to merchants in that sense, but we're not there yet.
Got it. Well, we don't have a lot of time left before I hand back to my co-host, Helen. I did want to ask everyone, very briefly, what is your forecast? What do you see happening in 3 years' time? What will open banking look like in 2023? And perhaps I'll go ahead and start, Mounir, and then I do want to hear everyone here, but what would be your forecast, Mounir?
So there's two things that I think will happen. This is my sort of humble opinion, which is not necessarily worth that of folks in the audience. The first one is that I think there will be a move towards commercial APIs or premium APIs, whatever we want to call them. And those are APIs that I think will bring the banks, will increase the appetite of banks to be on board. Things, as I mentioned, like transaction-based financing and access to instant loans. And then the other one is better authentication models. I think over time, just as the banks came around to being familiar with the concept of tokenized card payments, they will come around to the concept of tokenized bank accounts as a form of payment, and then that same long-lived token could be used for account information access as well. I think if we can get to that, and my hope is we will get to that, you will see that the appetite to engage in open banking will be better, and the adoption will be better.
Got it. Well, Carlos, what is what should I expect from my financial app in 3 years, or will it be a financial app? What's your forecast for open banking?
Thank you again, and again, if I don't get a chance, thank you to OBE and to all of the panelists. It's amazing to be speaking to all of you and debating this. I'm going to challenge all of you with one thing that we didn't mention, and again, I have to be the counterweight on all of this. Is we didn't talk about social inclusion and the unbanked, and that really bothers me. I think we all have a role to expand more. We only talked about corporates, we talked about people that we assume to be banked, but we haven't said anything about what we're going to do about the unbanked. And I think that that's a really important aspect. And if banks are looking, if banks, big techs, FinTechs, small tech, small institutions, neobanks, whatever, really want to look at the opportunity is to go after the unbanked. We're talking about millions and millions of people that really need social financial services. So I think that that is where the opportunity really lies. And I'd like to challenge everyone on this panel to really look at how we're going to do that in the next couple of years. So my forecast, looking at the advancements in Latin America, and I think Mounir said it correctly, this is what at least Open Vector we're aiming, is we're trying to create the right structures and pillars around the globe to ensure for open banking, open finance, open data. The true destination here and our passion is anywhere from Canada down to Chile, to Nigeria, to wherever we are, is to ensure that the right structures are in place so that we look at ease of cross-border solutions. So someone like Josh and Mounir and all of your fantastic products can come along and just place them across the board, with ease. So what I think is going to happen is, again, is an open finance move into open data with true international based offerings.
Got it. Well, Joshua, what is your view? What does Revolut have in store, 3 years from now, and will there be greater financial inclusion as a result, or what's your forecast?
That's a great challenge put out by Carlos, and I must say, challenge accepted. And I do see, like I was just mentioning before we started off, as contactless payments, open banking it's not something that's going to be fixed overnight. It'll take some time, but I do see, at least from a product perspective, some apps building some fantastic products on top of open banking. Just one that we were talking about is, imagine you just link your bank account, we go through your transactions or whatever, and in Revolut, you can obviously buy crypto, you can buy stocks, you can save money in a pot with the savings interest. Imagine if we could tell you exactly how much you should put in each of them to get to a certain amount of money that you want to spend. And this is how much we think that you'll be able to sustainably save over the next year just by the click of a button and all these transactions. So I feel like we'll have apps build some fantastic services and products from folks who always vary about so many of these financial products. And on the flip side, I also think that it's such an opportunity for the incumbent banks to kind of upgrade their APIs, their legacy. And whenever someone asks you the questions like, what's in it for the big banks? Like innovation. Innovation is probably the most important thing to all of us, right? And it's such an opportunity for them to innovate and they can build up products like we do now. So yeah, I love to see vision, to think of like big things, and I think I have big hopes for open banking a few years down the line.
Great. Well, and Hakan, what is your outlook for 2023? Where are we going to be?
2023. When you look back the last 3 years, when we talked about PSD2 and what it will all change, I think we are three years later. Things have changed, but I think we are still at the very, very, very beginning of open banking or open finance. I think in the next few years, we will see a next wave of regulations in different countries. I think that will come for sure. And I think these regulations will be mostly focusing on that, what Carlos and the other folks were talking about, open finance, where, you know, certain application where more competition is coming in, sharing product information so that better comparison sites can evolve, customers can pick and choose different services, and then switch accounts, switch loans, switch mortgages, and open banking can help to do that. In the current open banking setup, it's not possible, but I think we see the first developments in the UK with open finance and in other jurisdictions. Brazil is already in the path of open finance. We don't name it as such. I think this is a clear development for the next few years. Another one is probably, we talked about PASP and frictionless, you know, instant, invisible, and free. Yeah, but I think we will see first tangible applications or payment methods coming up that might be much more frictionless than we could expect, because we heard all the challenges, right, of SCA and the frictions, but I think that the regulators are also learning, especially in Europe, listening to the ecosystem that, you know, things can change. But I think there is some room for improvement here and there. But I think that regulation will be key, and some first payment applications we will see as well. On top of course, financial inclusion. I think, Carlos, I completely agree. I think countries like Pakistan, for example, that is not very obviously on the radar, is one of the countries that are also pushing for open banking, especially for financial inclusion. Financial inclusion here also means not only the unbanked, but also the underserved customers. For those customers who have a bank account, but don't have access to loans because they don't have a proper address or probably not enough information. And FinTechs can help to innovate there, right, in collaboration with banks. I think there will also much more coming up in the next few years.
Got it. Well, and Amit, your last before my co-host Helen, I think, also has some thoughts here. But you know, what are Accenture's customers going to look like in 3 years? What's going to be new for them?
I think 3 years is maybe a very short time frame to comment on. But if I just stretch that thinking a bit, and say about what does open banking look in 2025. One of the things that all of us are expecting to happen is open banking graduates onto open finance, graduates onto open data. So, and the implications of that are, I think, boundaries between industries will blur. You won't be able to make out that this is a bank versus this is a big tech versus this is somebody else. What you will see in 5-6 years time, because of the plethora of APIs and data points available, is people who dominate. It's organizations who focus on that customer experience and provide the right journey, who will dominate and own the customer experience, and they will provide one-stop platforms in the ecosystem. And I think this will give rise to what I call as super apps in 5 years' time. We are already seeing evidence of rise of super apps in Asia. So if you go to Singapore, Thailand, you can see this. I don't know if you've gone to Singapore and used Grab. They do everything within Grab. You can do banking, you can do payments, you can do everything you want to, order food, order your cab. So and I think we'll see more and more of that. And I expect, organizations like Apple and Google to step into that space, significantly. The last point which I'm expecting to see, and this is a slightly more near-term view, the initial wave has been all about APIs. There's been a huge noise in the market. Let's build the next API. There's been competition amongst organizations who can build a better API and all of that. But I think that stage will pass on, and we'll realize that APIs will be hygiene, and the next battleground will be data. So the players who are strong on data, who know what to do with all of this open data which is coming out, will be the winners.
Got it.
If I could just squeeze in one word, John, I just want to emphatically agree with what Amit just said, and just give you a quick example. Again, if you look at, to me, they're the sort of earliest and best-in-class model, UPI in India. They moved from 427 million transactions in 2017 to well over 10 billion. In 2019, and as of May this year, they did over 1 billion transactions for like 3 months in a row or so. And so when you have an interoperable environment this is the sort of adoption that you can see, even if there's a slow start at the beginning.
It sounds like a lot can potentially happen in 3 years. And I think that Helen also had some very interesting thoughts here, maybe a question here.
Thank you, John. Wow, those figures are phenomenal. I would like the panel to help me wrap up. We've heard a huge amount around the campfire this afternoon. And we have thousands and thousands tuning in, and then more on the view on demand. So I would like our panel to, in a sentence, and this is the challenge, in a sentence, to share with everybody the roadmap for the growth trajectory. So everybody that tunes in believes in open banking, open data, open finance. I absolutely get what Amit was saying, and truly do believe that's where our agenda is going for the next 6 months. But I'm really interested now in just a sentence on what we all need to do, everybody that's investing their time and their energy, what we need to do to make that growth trajectory happen. So Amit, if I could start with you, in a sentence, your wise counsel, please.
Work with the industry and the regulators to shape policy and drive this all in the right direction.
That was succinct. Thank you. Josh, I'm dying to hear what you say. You have been so inspirational. Thank you.
That's a very tough question, actually. But I completely agree, actually, with what Amit said, is to bring regulation and product people together, where we can see the UX cohabitate. And obviously, for us at Revolut, is exactly that, to build a super app which not only allows you to do one or two things with open banking, but gives the user essentially an end-to-end journey for every single thing that they want to do financially.
So the end-to-end of financial life. Thank you. So, Mounir, I've been blown away by some of the things you've shared with us. So, in a sentence, what do we need to do to make this growth trajectory happen, please?
To me, both for open banking and longer term for open finance and open data, it's better identity management. Whether it's in the form of something like a federated identity model via the banks, as you see in Sweden, or otherwise, I think that's what's going to be necessary for those user experiences and journeys to be seamless.
Thank you. Federated identity and data. Thank you. We've actually got that on our agenda next half year. So that was without any prompting. Brilliant. Thank you. Carlos, in a sentence, what do we need to do, please?
Very simple, one sentence. No firm can do it on their own. Embrace collaborative innovation.
Collaboration, key for us at Open Banking Excellence.
Innovative collaboration, absolutely.
Hakan, I'm going to leave the last to you. In a sentence, please, what do we need to do to make it happen?
I would say customer experience, business models, and a proper infrastructure. I think is all key, right? All this triangle.
Thank you. Wow, we've got some real key takeaways. And I, for one, am actually going to be re-listening to this, and I will view on demand. And I often find that viewing it a second time, I get more of those key nuggets. Now, I've got the poll, hence me having my glasses on. I just want to share with you the answer to our question: which region would be the most exciting for open banking around the world? So I need a bit of a drum roll even here. So we had a bit of a side bet on this before we came on air. Europe, 68%. So Europe is leading the way. Asia Pac, unsurprisingly, is second, 42%. That's actually why we're going out to Asia Pac at the end of the year. LATAM, 28%. The US, 25%. I actually think that's about to change. Africa, our friends in Africa, 11%. Canada, 6%. And the Middle East, 4%. Those figures may be slightly different from what some of you are seeing on screen. I've just had a screenshot sent to me about sort of 2 or 3 minutes ago. Absolutely brilliant. So talking of regions and traveling and countries, I would like to share some exciting news with you, a little bit of OBE news. We have a special relationship with Money 2020. We're the voice of open banking, and we will be going to Amsterdam in September So on the 22nd to the 24th of September, we will be going. If you jump onto LinkedIn, not now, but if you jump onto LinkedIn, you will get a special discount code. So I'm going, and we hope to see you there. So what I'd like to do now is say a huge thank you to John. John, you can come back and co-host with me anytime. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you. And a huge, huge heartfelt thank you to all who have been authentic, generous, and very, very open, giving us all some very, very clear direction and sharing their insights. It's been a privilege, an absolute privilege to have this chat amongst friends. We could have talked for much longer, and I would like to invite you all back to do so. So all that remains for me now is to wish everybody the very, very best of health. Say thank you for tuning in. Please take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Goodbye.
Thank you.